Hey, still cousins. Y'all already know what time it is. Animated horror story time. I don't have a green shirt, so I got some green beats. Happy St. Patty's Day! And, gotta cheers you up. Can't cheers and not take a sip, so y'all gotta take a sip too. Go get something and drink it. Let's get right into it. Today we're watching Mort. Mort. I don't think I've ever seen Mort's videos, but we're gonna see what they are looking like today. Some St. Patrick's Day horror stories animated. 4 of them. So let's get right into it and see what's Mark. See what Mark is. I want to say Mark. See what Mort is working with. Let's go.
I've been working in bars and pubs. I've been working in bars and pubs since I left school.
Jump right into
I
it.
was only supposed to be a year at most, earning a wage while I figured out just what I wanted to do with my life. But before I knew it, just 1 year became 2, then 3 once I had secured a position as supervisor in a local pub. Being a bartender is hard, but it is never boring. Busy shifts generally means lots of laughs and lots of tips. So, as much as you get mobbed on the weekends, it never feels too overwhelming, especially when your favorite regular buys you Jaeger shots when the boss isn't looking.
Jaeger's disgusting.
However, there is one date on the calendar that every bartender all over the world has come to dread. That date is March 17th, St. Patrick's Day. Now, where I live, St. Patrick's Day means everyone, and I mean everyone, no matter their background or identity, suddenly pretends they're Irish. From the Kiss Me I'm Irish shirts that sell by the truckload, to the fake ginger beads and 4-leaf clover hats that plaster the bar's floor once the night is over. St. Patty's Day always seems to bring out the wilder side of the local population. This is only exacerbated by the number of actual Irish people who get a ferry over for a few days to celebrate the holiday among foreigners. Those guys don't mess around. We open the pub at 10 in the morning to start serving breakfast and lunch, and there is always a bevy of Irishmen waiting outside, having already sank a few pints in hotel bars before they arrive. This really does add a feeling of chaos to the proceedings, and I'm not sure if it's the English sense of competition, but people genuinely do try to outdrink the Irish on their own national holiday. A foolish endeavor if ever there was one. This can lead to some pretty horrendous working conditions, and sometimes the number of times you end up mopping up vomit ticks over into the double digits. Gross, I know, but manageable. What wasn't manageable for me anyway was a visit our pub received from a man a few Patty's days ago, one that I don't think I'll ever forget. So one of the things that strikes you about the Patty's Day crowd is how they're all basically wearing the same thing. I have previously mentioned all the tacky souvenir-type items revelers can get their hands on, but maybe not the ridiculous proliferation of said items. Companies like Guinness, in a bid to sell as much of the black stuff as they possibly can, flood entire cities with merchandise that is often given to drinkers for free. So picture a scene where 99 people out of 100 have green-branded Guinness t-shirts on. Most are wearing those dumb leprechaun hats, those ginger beards, and some are even wearing extremely creepy-looking leprechaun masks. Starting to get the picture here? Everyone looks alike, which can make bartending particularly difficult, not to mention how difficult it is to remember who's ordered what drink. So at one point I'm pulling up pints when this one fella in a mask steps up. I ask him what he's after, and he says something unintelligible through his leprechaun mask. Now I'm sick to the back teeth of asking people to take their masks off so I can make out their orders, so I may have been a bit rude when I asked him to take off that daft mask. He just shakes his head, asks me to lean closer, then orders a pint of Guinness in a distinctly English accent. Something you need to know about Guinness in particular: you don't just pour a pint of Guinness and whack it down in front of a customer. You have to pour about 2/3 of the thick black fluid into the glass, then leave it to settle before topping it with the rest of the Guinness. That
Ew.
way, you end up with a perfectly balanced pint of stout that's as creamy as it is malty.
It's disgusting.
So that's exactly what I do. I pour the dude's drink, then leave it to settle, just like I'd done 1,000 times before, only to find the masked man almost violently waving at me. I asked him what was wrong, and he starts complaining that I'd only half poured his bloody drink, and that I was to bring it to him immediately. I laugh a wee bit, then start giving him the talk about how he needs to let it settle before serving blah blah blah. He then accuses me of taking the piss out of him, and starts kicking off about how I'm looking for a fight with him and all this other nonsense. At that point, I cut him off. We can't have anyone like that in our pub, and they're only ever out to cause trouble, and giving them alcohol just makes that kind of situation 100 times worse. So I put on my polite professional voice, calling him sir and all of that, and gently explain why he can go jump in a lake. Not my exact words, but you get the idea. That's when he just comes out with, "I'm gonna effing kill you." I was taken aback by this, and
Over some
I remember
Guinness?
just leaning back with a look of confusion like, "What did you say to me, fella?" He repeats that he's going to wait outside until we close, wait for me to leave, and then kill me.
Oh, that's
He
detail.
said he didn't live far, and that he could go back and fetch a kitchen knife in less than 10 minutes.
Oh,
I've had threats like this before, and yeah, they're grim.
that's
But it's always from a
premeditated.
guy who's coked up and raving. 9 times out of 10, they don't even remember you the next day, and the drunk that was threatening to smash your face in will try and make casual conversation about the footy, as they'd never even met you. But this guy was
It
calm
just
as
tastes real
anything.
good today.
He just gently and slowly explained how he was going to kill me, and it didn't matter if he was arrested or caught on CCTV because I'd be dead, just like I deserved.
Oh,
I'm not even afraid to admit that I was actually seriously freaked out at this point.
because like
I reached forward, trying to pull the mask off that concealed his identity from me, but he dodged, waving as he walked away from the bar and disappeared into the crowds. And I do mean disappeared. I spent the next 15 minutes or so wandering around the horseshoe-shaped bar trying to figure out where this fellow had gone, but I couldn't see him. There was every chance he was just tucked away in a corner somewhere, whining to his mates about how the bartender is a bellend or whatever, but it seemed just as likely that this guy really had gone back to his flat to get a weapon and that he was just using the chaos of the day itself to his advantage. By the end of the shift, I was emotionally exhausted. Every time I saw one of those daft leprechaun masks, I couldn't keep my eyes off of it. Every single one could have been that lad coming back to stab me to death in my own bloody workplace. I know it all seems crazy in retrospect, that he was obviously just
that's
full
not
of
even the same
bluster.
dude.
But every murder story seems ridiculous until it's plastered all over the newspapers. With all those people coming out of the woodwork to say, "Oh, we never saw it coming, and it was just so unexpected." But a part of me really did think it was going to be my face on the newspapers the next day, and sometimes I actually thank the man upstairs for keeping me safe that night.
Thank God he ain't come back.
Some living arrangements can be unusual, to say the least, and renting on-site at a storage facility is very, very different than living in a regular apartment. My uncommon living area connects to the storage facility by a long, dark, cold hallway from a door in what we call our porch area, and every night I have to walk past this doorway to get into my apartment. When my wife and I go to bed at the same time, I don't notice it, but when she goes to sleep before me and the house is dark and quiet, an acute anxiety grips me as I quickly patter down the hallway to my bedroom. Something about that doorway to the storage facility feels ominous, always has. A small peephole is in the door, and sometimes I imagine looking through it at night only to see something or someone in the hallway on the other side. One night
Right,
last
playing
year, in
tricks
the
with your
weeks
mind.
leading up to St. Patrick's Day, strange events began to unfold.
Someone's in
At
your
first, we didn't
hallway
notice anything
smoking?
too weird, mainly because the place's customers are in and out of the facility at all hours of the day
Oh,
and
he's
night.
tweaking. You see his
Not to
eyeballs?
mention the fact that they can turn out to be some pretty strange folks when all is said and done.
Some tweakers.
Anyway, at first, it was just things like my toolbox going missing and then reappearing broken, or a small pile of leaves being left in front of my wife's office door. We figured it was bored teenagers, maybe even a drunk stumbling home from the speakeasy around the corner. But then things were starting to get weirder. We awoke one morning with the bedroom windows open when we didn't remember opening them the night before. A quick inventory of our belongings showed that nothing had been stolen, but
that's enough for
we
me and my
found a
husband
police
to move.
report for what
I
was
promise
apparently
you, we would've
attempted
left.
burglary. One night at around 4 a.m., our bedroom lights began wildly turning on and off, waking us up, and stopped just as quickly as it began. We put it down to an electrical fault and made a mental note to call the landlord. But the very next morning, we found the bathroom mirror was shattered, and in the living room, all of the furniture was stacked into a big pile. The night before St. Patrick's Day, I really didn't want to be home alone. Rosa, my wife, had to work late, so unfortunately I didn't really have a choice.
Ugh,
we were both on edge
that's
at this
the
point
worst.
from the events of the previous days and nights, and we were constantly snapping at each other for a lack of sleep. Thankfully, I had to work too and was able to get away from the apartment for a few
My
hours,
husband was just trying to put me to bed.
but I dreaded returning home. When I finally did so, Rosa was still at work. I gave her a call to see how she was doing, and she seemed stressed. It was a busy day, and she had been forced to take on extra paperwork, but she assured me she'd be done soon, as fast as she could. The moment I walked through the door, I felt like someone was watching me. I also noticed that it was absolutely freezing inside, even though it had been a pretty nice day outside that day.
That's haunted.
I
That's
checked
demons.
the windows to see if they were inexplicably open again, but they were closed. Then I walked down the hall towards the porch and found the source of the cold. The door to connecting our apartment to the facility was wide open, and a draft was coming in from the dark hallway. I closed the door, concerned with how it had gotten open because we always kept it locked. After Rosa got in from the office, things began to get weirder. She was just as shocked as I was to learn that the door in the porch area was open when I came home, but she had some news for me too.
What happened?
While I was at work, apparently the power had been going on and off all day, despite near-perfect weather. We had ended up purchasing one of those home CCTV systems you can link up to your tablet device. Rosa had been watching a feed of the security cameras and said that he'd seen people walking around the facility who never came through the front gate. As she was telling me all the strange things that happened that day, the door to the facility hallway slammed open.
Oh!
We slowly approached the door to see
Why
who
would
had
y'all-
opened it, but no one was there. We locked the door to the hallway again, the house being eerily quiet as we did so. It was then we began to hear a faint sound coming from the storage facility. It sounded like a dozen voices, all talking or singing in unison. Whoever it was, it had to be the same group of people that had been basically terrorizing us for weeks by that point.
Maybe that's demons.
We decided to confront them, and it might have been the biggest mistake we ever
Who
made.
is we?
We headed over to the storage stage the noises seemed to be coming from, banging on the metal door as loud as I could.
Whose
to gain their
idea was
attention.
it? Because that's whose fault it is.
Slowly, the door
and I
before
feel like
us
it's
opened.
yours.
There, standing on the table, were three
Oh!
short figures with masks on their faces. We couldn't tell if they were kids or grown-ups with dwarfism, but surrounding them were taller, lither figures who also wore masks to conceal their faces. The three smaller people on the table were the ones doing the singing, only it sounded a lot more like chanting in some old language now that we were close. As soon as they realized we weren't invited, that we weren't who they were expecting, the chanting stopped, and all masked faces turned towards us. It was only then that we saw a mass of blood and gore on the table in the center of the small figures.
They just standing in
I only
it.
saw it for a moment before the door slammed shut again. But to this day, I've not been able to get that mess out of my mind. I still remember the smell that came from that room, the raw meat smell. It makes me sick to this day. We ran back into our apartment, locking the door behind us and immediately calling the cops.
I bet you did.
We struggled to relay just what we'd seen, insisting
went
that they had to
some
hurry as
people
we
dressed
suspected
up.
that there were children at risk.
Some short people dressed up in
But when we
green.
arrived, we could no longer hear the chanting sound coming from the storage facility. I was hardly surprised when the cops forced their way inside and found no one present, but What really confused me is that there wasn't a single trace of blood we'd seen. The cops told us that forensics teams combed the facility and couldn't find a single fiber or fingerprint to corroborate our story. Not long after we
Oh, well, you ain't gotta tell me all that to say that you ain't find nothing.
We were practically living rent-free in that apartment, but when it came to the horror we'd experienced that night, money was no issue. I'd have paid double what we were paying now just for peace of mind, because I never, ever want to run into those people again. Because another encounter, and I don't think we'll get away so safely.
I bet you won't. They gonna sick them folks down on y'all like some hound dogs.
I didn't know much about St. Patrick's Day when I first moved to America. I was familiar with American culture, sure, and growing up in Hokkaido in Japan, I was vaguely aware that St. Patrick's Day existed. But I had no idea it was taken so seriously by Irish Americans. So my first March 17th as a student at Boston University was certainly an eye-opener.
Boston.
I remember waking up that morning like it was any other. I threw on some clothes, ate a small breakfast, then headed down to Boston Common to catch the T to the university library. It was only then that I saw just how enthusiastic Boston was over St. Patrick's Day. Almost everyone I saw had some item of green clothing. Even smartly dressed businessmen had little green pocket squares or wore four-leaf clover pins. I saw big groups of kilted men with those noisy bag things, and even people dressed as small red-haired creatures, though I can't remember the word for them. Yet I could barely believe my eyes when I saw the Charles River. Somehow, some way, the city had managed to dye to entirely a bright green. Everything seemed bigger and louder in America.
That sounds
Japan,
very
where
exciting.
we almost pride ourselves on not showing too much emotion. I was reflecting on this for a moment as the T stopped and looked on some more passengers, but as one man embarked the train, he immediately locked eyes with me. I said a silent prayer that he would leave me alone, but it was wishful thinking. He'd already given me the kind of look that many girls dread. The kind of look a cat might give a wounded mouse. Then, to my ultimate disappointment, he sat down next to me. He reeked of alcohol.
Where'd the other guy go that was over there?
That I had to subtly cover my nose to keep from feeling nauseous. I didn't drink alcohol back then, and I still rarely do. The smell still makes me feel sickly even to this day. So I simply put my earphones in and tried to keep to myself as the tea started moving again. A few minutes went by and I felt the man turning towards me, before the muffled sound of him saying something that could be heard through my earbuds. I tried to ignore him as best I could, but the man began to poke me in the arm to get my attention. I couldn't ignore him anymore, so I took out my earphones.
As a bystander, if I was a bystander in that situation, I would have cussed him out for her. I just cussed a man out the other day for a woman. I was walking and he stopped her to talk. Oh, blah, 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 and she was going somewhere. Do you know? I said, do you know her? Oh, she's my friend. You don't know this woman. Leave her alone. Why are you poking her? I would have, sir, why are you touching her? Do you know her? Are you guys together? No, so stop touching her. She doesn't look like she want to talk to you. You know, you gotta be rude to people, especially strangers.
Him anymore, so I took out my earphones and I asked him if I could help him in any way. Why aren't you wearing green?
He's gonna pinch you, bitch.
Me, slurring his words as he did so. At first, I had no idea what he was talking about, but I quickly remembered that wearing green clothing seemed to be a sort of tradition among locals on this particular date. Yet still, I didn't wish to engage with
Just say your eyes are green.
I might have lied just a little to get him to back off. I don't speak, so much, English, I said, pretending to be ignorant. I thought this might deter the man. It wasn't the first time I'd pretended not to speak English to avoid a man's attention, and usually it worked. Just not this time. Why aren't you wearing green?
Oh, God!
He spoke much louder now.
No, he did.
Punctuating his final word by grabbing the sleeve of his own green pullover and waving it in my face. As he leaned in, another wave of his alcohol-soaked breath wafted into my nostrils. I couldn't bring myself to answer him. I thought if I tried to speak, I might vomit up my breakfast.
Just pinch her and get it over
I
with.
simply shrugged at him as if I didn't understand and then tried to go back to my phone. That's when I felt an intense pain on my left arm. I cried out, shifting in my seat and turning to see that drunk man had actually pinched me. He was laughing as he did it too.
Oh, I called it. Oh, he's so ignorant. Oh, he's so ignorant, but that's so funny. Ugh. Sometimes it's so embarrassing to be an American from from someone else's point of view. But that's, she's talking about the other people. She's not talking about white people. So, one of my people would never. But that's hilarious. I knew that was coming. Ugh. Don't touch strangers, guys. Don't touch strangers.
Turning to see that drunk man had actually
He really pinched her. I said he was going to pinch her.
He was laughing as he did it too, with a little drool catching on his bottom lip before running down his chin.
That's nasty.
You don't wear green, you get pinched, he said, still giggling to himself. Other people in the tea began to notice now, some looking pretty outraged that this drunk man was treating me this way. Please don't, I managed to say, holding the part of my arm where the man had pinched me. But this only seemed to make him angry.
Girl, he pinched you that hard?
By the time I jumped up from the seat to move away from him, other passengers on the train were angrily shouting at the man to leave me alone. People in Boston are very friendly, especially to foreigners like me, and as I got off the train a few stops early, I decided not to let this experience tarnish the city's image in my eyes. After a long day of studying, I was headed back to my apartment in an Uber taxi when I got a text from a few friends. They told me they were having a few drinks in a big Irish bar near Government Center. I forgot the name, but they asked if I would like to join them for some green beer. I never heard of green beer, but they insisted this was a big tradition in America. I was not entirely in the mood for drinking, but I did like the idea of seeing some of the party, especially since it only happened once a year. If the beer in the river were green, what else had Boston changed the color of? I had to find out.
Everything.
So, I arrived back at my apartment, rushing upstairs to take a shower and change my clothes. This time I tried to find something green to wear, only to find that I didn't actually own anything distinctly green. I had a turquoise t-shirt, but that was about as green as it got. I text my friend again, but she reassured me I could borrow the green scrunchie she had in her wrist. That way I could be safe from more pinching men, hopefully. But as I began to walk around to the Irish bar, that was no more than 5 or 10 minutes walk from my apartment, I happened to walk by a tea station. Standing outside
was the
last person I ever wanted to see. It was the drunk man from that morning, with a brown paper bag in his hand. He'd obviously been drinking since that very early morning, and he looked even worse than he did on the train. I hoped he would be too drunk to see me or even recognize me, but to my complete and utter horror, I saw a flash of recognition in his eyes. He shouted after me, and I tried to walk faster to avoid him, but it was impossible. His rude, racist shouts became even louder, and he started to run after me. I had tears in my eyes as I ran down the sidewalk away from him. I ran to the first police officer I saw, bursting into tears as I fell into his arms. I tried to explain what was going on, but I was panicking a lot. And then I turned to point at the man who was following me. There was no one there, only happy, friendly partygoers. No sign of the drunk.
Don't make me sick.
The policeman walked me back to my apartment. He was very friendly and understanding, especially since I was so upset that my English had failed me. Most people in Boston are very nice and friendly, as I said, but some, not so much. Especially when alcohol is involved, I sometimes think the world would be very different if people didn't drink.
That was a bit much. That supposed to be a kangaroo or a bunny?
It is March 17th, 2019, St. Patrick's Day. In Cookstown, County Tyrone, 17-year-old Lauren Bollock is getting ready to go to a party. She and a group of friends had spent their entire school day in increasing levels of excitement, swapping ideas on what to wear, exchanging rumors on who would and wouldn't be attending, and most importantly, scheming on how to get their hands on the most quintessential of St. Patrick's Day's amenities, booze. No Paddy's Day party is complete without an unhealthy quantity of the demon drink, as any self-respecting Irishman will tell you. And as for the underage Lauren, buying alcohol would be as easy as putting on a little extra makeup and standing on her tippy toes at the counter. After all, without the telltale school tie, very little separates the appearance of a student and a fledgling office worker. Lauren and her friends finished their studies for the day before congregating in one of their parents' houses to prepare for the night's festivities. Outfits were road-tested, makeup applied, and the girls even sampled a little of their alcohol haul to get healthy pre-drunk before they departed. When the time came, they piled into a waiting taxicab which drove them a few miles down the road to the Greenvale Hotel. The sight that greeted them was one of utter chaos. The Greenvale Hotel on the outskirts of Cookstown had decided to throw a Paddy's Day dry disco for the local youths. Underage drinking is a huge problem in the UK in general, let alone in Northern Ireland, where alcohol is seen as a staunch tradition, even a rite of passage. If parents knew where their children were on one of the rowdiest nights of the year, it belayed their fears, even if they understood how inevitable it was that someone would get their hands on alcohol. The popularity of such an event would be evident to Lauren and her friends upon their arrival at the Greenvale, for outside a venue that had a maximum capacity of just 100 or so, at least 500 to 600 excitable Irish young people had assembled and were waiting to be allowed inside. Such a raucous scene might have been off-putting to another group of girls, but not Lauren and her friends. They found the huge gathering of their peers to be intensely exciting and attractive. Rural Ireland can be an extremely tedious place to live for a young person, lacking in all the adventure and attractions of the big city. So any opportunity to mingle with a large group of their peers outside of school hours is something very few Irish teenagers can pass up. Lauren and her friends climbed out of the taxi into a cold and windy evening to socialize with old friends and make a few new ones in the process. Meanwhile, inside the Greenvale Hotel, the management team is in a quandary. They knew all too well that there was far too many youths outside, and that not all of them could be let into the venue. However, St. Patrick's Day was a serious earner for the hotel. After a traditionally quiet January and February, where hedonists eschew the good life in favor of gym memberships and detox regimens, Paddy's Day always kick-started the local economy in a big way. To limit their patrons during such an event would surely be inviting financial ruin, but something had to be done to avoid disappointing more than half of the young people gathered outside. The general manager of the venue made the decision to go outside to address the waiting revelers. He told them in no certain terms that the Greenvale simply did not have the facilities to accommodate so many of them, and some would have to go home disappointed. He then asked the waiting youths to form an orderly queue at the entrance, where staff would take their entrance fee and stamp their hands with black ink to verify them. And that's when things started to go wrong. As I previously mentioned, a long-standing tradition in the UK and elsewhere is to imbibe alcohol before arrival at a pub, club, or party, in order to get a head start and save a little money. The same applied to the gathering of underage youths outside the Greenvale that night. So instead of doing as they were asked and forming an orderly queue at the entranceway, what started fairly calmly had soon descended into a chaotic mess of shoving, shouting, and fighting. Hotel staff pleaded with the drunken crowds to calm themselves, but their cries were barely heard over the throngs of barking teenagers, some of who had begun to shove their peers towards the waiting line. Lauren was one of those who had rushed to queue up first and began to feel herself being trapped against one of the Greenvale's outer walls. She tried to push back, to give herself a little personal space, but it was impossible.
It's so dangerous.
No matter how hard she and her friends shoved back, the crowd didn't seem to disperse or diffuse. It wasn't long before neither Lauren nor her friends could move. Their arms were trapped by their sides, their bodies squeezed and compressed until some began to complain of feeling faint. Lauren was being crushed against the brick wall, finding harder and harder to breathe as the crowds formed tighter and tighter around her. At one point, she saw a young man with glasses, so pale he was almost white as a sheet, collapse from the lack of oxygen available to him. This was barely noticed by the pushing crowds, who simply walked over and stepped on the unconscious boy, crushing him to death beneath their feet with nothing else in their minds but the desire to drink, dance, and flirt. With the very last of her strength, Lauren began to shout and yell. "My friends are on the ground, move back! My friends have fainted, move back! My friends can't breathe, move back!" Nothing. Not one bit of movement or compassion. In fact, one of the last things Lauren saw before she passed out was the sight of laughing, spotted-faced teenage boys amusing themselves by pushing the crowds towards the doors, trying to get them inside so they too could get to drinking. A horrific sight to see in the moments before unconsciousness, but Lauren wouldn't just be rendered unconscious. The crush at the Greenvale Hotel that night went on for another half an hour. By the time the crowd realized what was happening, it was far too late. Lauren, along with several other teenagers, had been suffocated in the crush. Nigel Rudell, the medical director of North Ireland's ambulance service, told the BBC that emergency crews who responded to a 999 call shortly before 9:30 p.m. encountered upsetting scenes.
All those
At this
damn
stage,
kids
everything
that weren't
points towards
supposed
it
to
being
be
a
there.
tragic accident, and our hearts absolutely go out to the families of those involved and everybody who was caught up in this incident last night, he said. Yet the tragedy seemed to have been painted by the media as a seemingly unavoidable one, an incident as sudden and shocking as a terror attack or natural disaster. But there was nothing natural about the deaths at the Greenvale Hotel that night, as they had been entirely avoidable. The facts remain that poor planning, drug use, and youthful zeal had proved a deadly cocktail. And without admitting this to ourselves, the Greenvale Hotel crush is doomed to happen again, and again, and again.
That's ridiculous. It's just like Black Friday. Okay, more. We see you. No, it's a pretty good video. Well, guys, as I said, happy St. Patrick's Day. These were good. Please be safe if you guys do decide to go out. This is going to be a very late upload, but, you know, who cares? Yeah. Happy St. Patrick's Day. Have a great time. Get drunk. Get drunk inside. Because the chances and possibilities of stuff that can happen outside is ridiculous. We're not here for it. Love you guys. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. What's your favorite holiday? Did you wear green today? If not, did somebody pinch you today? 3 questions that you guys can answer. Let me know in the comments. And I love you guys.